Have you ever wondered that so often we don't feel God's presence? How many times have you talked to people who come into the front door of the church? They sit in their pews, they do all the things that they're supposed to do, and yet when it comes right down to it, it's hard for them to point to a particular moment or to have a particular experience that they can describe God at work in their lives. A lot of times, the people who belong here in the pews aren't present because they've never been able to identify a particular time or a particular experience in their life. And as they look back over their lives, they wonder, was there something missing? Or is there something faulty about what they've heard? Or have they just not followed up or found this moment that we talk about or that might be available to them? So let me give you a couple of hints on what might need to happen if that moment's never taken place. And the first seems blindingly obvious, but something that we often forget. It's to seek. If that moment hasn't happened, sometimes it's no more complicated than pushing at a door that's unlocked. We have to go looking. I know that God is faithful and responds to what we need, but sometimes the first step is to acknowledge that we need it, and we only know that by going to seek. The second thing is something like it, and that is we have to be attentive. Once we find out what we're looking for, or even simply find out that we're looking, we can open our eyes to be attentive. Think about what happened when Paul ran into Christ on the road to Damascus. He was struck by this blinding light and heard his name spoken. And the first impact that it had on him was when he got up and found out that he couldn't see. The truth of the matter is he hadn't been able to see his whole life long. He'd been blind from the beginning. But the first impact was that he began to understand what was true about himself as he began to reflect and to understand what this encounter had meant. Once we begin to look, then we begin to find. And the third thing might sound kind of odd as well. Don't mind putting God to the test here. Ask God for the sign that you need. How often do we, with complete freedom of conscience, pray for world peace and the resolution for all the problems in the Middle East or Ukraine or in China or Africa? But when it comes to the individual problems that we have, the smallest thing, we remain mute, somehow presuming that God might not care about what we need or about who we are. It might also mean that we're reluctant to have God become as close as He might be if our individual problems are places where God could intervene and act. God might be uncomfortably close. But if what we're waiting for is God to act in our lives, why not open our lives to where God can act? Ask that we might receive. Seek that we might find. Knock so that the door might be opened. If we do that, my hope is, my suggestion is that God will indeed become present to us. Now, that's not to say that it will always be intense and always be just as close to us as we can imagine. After all of our relationships, no matter what they are, go up and down. No husband and wife can imagine that their relationship will be as it first developed or as when they got home from the honeymoon. But all relationships, if they are to remain intense, become our relationships that even though they go up and down, they have their own cycles, they are relationships of presence and a relationship of renewal and relationships that bring life and hope. If what we want to do is find God present in our lives, if what we want is that God's immediacy becomes something that we can point to, we have to begin by seeking, by becoming attentive, and by inviting God to, in fact, be a part of our lives.